Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming to the Minnesota Transportation Museum Adult Lecture Series. This is our final lecture for this spring. We will be taking a summer hiatus as we are all quite busy with our summer projects and resuming again in September with our monthly second Wednesday of the month lectures. Today, I am so fortunate to welcome Jack Barbier for us today. He is the president, right?
Current
President, thank you, of the Northstar Railway Historical Society. Yes, I got it right on the first try. As well as the co-founder of All Aboard Minnesota, which is what he is here to talk to us about today. So please join me in welcoming Jack and his exciting story here.
Well, I hope it's exciting. Well, thank you for coming, everybody. Quick show of hands. Is anybody here a member of All Aboard Minnesota? Anybody? One? I see one. Okay. Well, they asked me to do this program on setting up this nonprofit called All Aboard Minnesota, which has been around now for a little over 12 years, 13 years. Kind of how we got going, what the premise was behind it, and sort of the path that we chose to become advocates for expanded passenger rail here in Minnesota and the upper Midwest. I want to start out by saying that I was one of the original co-founders, and I served as vice president on the board for the first 6-7 years before I stepped aside. So I am still a member, but I'm not on the board, so I do not speak for All Aboard Minnesota today, so this is just background from my perspective. Little background, I'm from the Detroit area, and I didn't move up here until 1980, so I never saw a Zephyr, never saw a Hiawatha, never saw a 400, never saw a Rocket, never saw a Badger or a Gopher. I grew up riding New York Central between Detroit and Ann Arbor, Grand Trunk Western up to Durand and back, and quite oftentimes motor over to Windsor and we'd take the Canadian National up to Toronto, which was always great trips. And back in the 60s when I was just coming of age, the early 60s, of course, steam was gone by then, but the Grand Trunk used to run Northerns, 484s, out of Brush Street Station in Detroit up to Durand on one-day weekend day trips, and one of my bon vivant aunts took me on that starting at age 9 or 10, and the die was cast by that time. I was a budding rail fan. As soon as I learned how to write, I started writing to railroad PR departments, asking them to send me anything they had laying around, brochures, literature, and soon my mailbox got full of 8x10 pictures of the latest D&H locomotives or annual reports, and I thought it was pretty thrilling. So, you know how it goes. Once it gets in your blood, it's there and it doesn't go away. And for me, it just kept on increasing. I think that's probably a common story, amongst most of you guys. So a job move brought me to Minnesota about 1980, and I soon became aware of a group called the Minnesota Association of Railroad Passengers, which was headed by a fellow big-time attorney by the name of Andrew Selden. Anybody a member of MinARP? Nobody? Okay. Mr. Selden's nonprofit, the Minnesota Association of Railroad Passengers, was really the only group around that I could find that was watching train travel and wondering about it, but I became sort of down on that group because Mr. Selden's approach tended to be kind of caustic and derogatory and critical, and it wasn't really something that I felt was promoting the idea of better train service. In looking around, I saw that the Empire Builder, the only Amtrak train that served Minnesota, comes through the entire state in the dead of night. And I said, we got to be able to do better than this. So I became a member of the Rick Harnish's group out of Chicago, the Midwest High-Speed Rail Alliance, who was doing the advocacy, the education, the promotion of increased train service. His bent was a little bit more on the high-speed stuff, but that being as it may. I also became familiar with the fellows over in Michigan at the Michigan Association of Railroad Passengers, and it turns out one of their founding members, a fellow by the name of John DeLora, actually kind of came from the same area that I grew up in. So, working for Rick Harnish, I met a fellow by the name of Jerry Ratliff. We were both members of the Midwest High-Speed Rail Alliance at that time, and we got together at the Midway Station on train days, this would have been back 2008 maybe, to give away high-speed rail stuff and to promote the whole thing. And we got to talking, and I said, you know, Jerry, he knew about Andrew Selden too, and I said, don't you think we need something more here in Minnesota to promote increased railroads? He said, yes, I definitely do. So I reached out to John DeLora in Michigan, went over and met with him, and he gave me the names of two other individuals who were at that point NARP representative, regional directors here in Minnesota, and their names were Brian Nelson and Bob Moen. Brian is was a corporate marketing person. Bob Moen was a Metro Transit guy who owned, I don't know how many, 12, 15, 20 passenger cars, which he still keeps down in Charles City, bless his heart. And we got together with them, and we broached the idea, what do you think about starting a group that we could actually, you know, try and move the needle here in Minnesota, which, as you know, is politically, it's back and forth. It's just harder than heck to try and get anything through the legislature. He said, we're in. So they recruited John Goodman, who ran the Midway Amtrak station until he retired, a walking encyclopedia on everything to do with passenger rail. If you don't know John, you should get to know him. I mean, great guy. We recruited him, and we recruited a fellow from Wisconsin called Mark Quam, who had had a great deal of experience starting up nonprofits in the state of Wisconsin. He's still currently very active, Wisconsin Association of Railroad Passengers and the West Central Coalition. He lives in Eau Claire. They're trying to push for service from Eau Claire to the Twin Cities and then extend that down to Chicago. So we all got together and said, let's do it. Let's form a nonprofit. And we did. We created a mission statement. We created a business plan. We applied for and received the IRS's 501c3. You need bylaws for that. So there was a lot of heavy lifting in the first few years to get that going. And I was in touch with Rick Harnish down in Chicago. And I said, Rick, do you have any advice for us getting this thing going? He says, yes. I would say one thing right off the top, don't use the term high-speed rail in your title, because politically it's toxic. There are so many people adamantly opposed to high-speed rail that he said you'd be much better off with a different name. So we agreed on All Aboard Minnesota. So we've got All Aboard Minnesota, we've got All Aboard Wisconsin, Michigan, Harnish's group in Chicago. There's others now. Ohio has a very vibrant rail advocacy group. And we started cultivating relationships with MnDOT and their Office of Passenger Rail. And we decided that the primary focus starting out of the gate would be to advocate for a second train between the Twin Cities and Chicago, which we thought we desperately needed. You all know, as much as I do, how unreliable the Amtrak Empire Builder is coming across the northern tier. And to us, it was just unfathomable that people would buy a ticket to leave at 8 in the morning and not leave until 5 in the afternoon. We said, we've got to have a train just between these two cities which operates on a reliable schedule. So we sat down and put together a white paper, which we provided to MnDOT's planning people. And in that white paper, we stated that in our belief, knowing what we did about train travel, the train should start at Target Field Station in Minneapolis. It should get to Chicago in enough running time to be competitive with highway, which is to say, 7 hours or less. It shouldn't make 12 stops across Wisconsin to help it make that schedule. And so we were off to the races. Dan Chrome, MnDOT, took that under his wing. And we began the process of trying to figure out how to get this done because they needed money. They always do. They have to go to the legislature, and MnDOT cannot lobby. Legislatures had the power. So one of our first initiatives then was to start cultivating relationships with various legislators in the Minnesota House and Senate and try and find some what we call champions in the legislature that would help us get bills, pass bills, drum up support in the legislature. And one of those names was Alice Hausman. Bless her heart, she's retired now, but she was one of our earlier champions. We set up a website. We started going to all the train days things at, now it's St. Paul Union Depot, to try and recruit new members. New members started signing up. We created some promotional literature to tell people what we were all about. We started developing some maps saying this is where we think trains need to go in Minnesota, not just to Chicago, but up to Duluth, up to Fargo-Moorhead, down to Kansas City. Those maps are on the back of all of our business cards. And I do have business cards up here for anybody that might want to grab one. My contact information is on there, so if you want to talk about anything in the future, by all means let me know. We soon came to the conclusion it probably would have been obvious, but until you actually face getting stuff through the legislature, you don't realize that the vast majority of our House reps and senators have never been on a train. They don't know what a train trip is. To them, it's abstract, like it is to the very majority of the people in this state. They've never been on a train. So it's hard to talk to people about what you're advocating for when they have no clue what you're talking about. Right? I mean, how does that work? So it was an uphill battle to educate and advocate for more service. And of course, every few years there's elections and, the Republicans are in charge, the Democrats are in charge, we're gridlocked here, we're gridlocked there, trying to loosen up some money to help MnDOT get the funds that they needed for matching this, matching that, to get federal dollars in for planning, whatnot, and so forth. It was an uphill, it still is an uphill battle. We've lost Alice, unfortunately. But there are others stepping up. In the House, Erin Kogel. If Erin Kogel is your House rep, please send her a letter in support. She's been one of our new champions. In the Senate, my own state senator is Ann Johnson Stewart. She sits as the co-chair of the Senate Transportation Committee. She's also a civil engineer. She's done a lot of highway work. I took her on the Northstar. She was very impressed with it. That's before it went away. Unfortunately, a little too late for anything to happen there. But she does understand why train travel should be a part of our transportation DNA. Let's face it, rail lines, especially ones that are already set up for 79 miles an hour, like the Empire Builder route, are great places to run trains that are efficient. They give people an alternative to driving on the freeways. I don't know if any of you have driven up. Does anybody up here have a cabin up north? Anybody? Yeah, one guy. Okay. So you drive out of here on a Friday or Saturday up I-94 and you immediately run into gridlock, right? And it's stop and go, stop and go. God help you if there's an accident someplace. Before you get off and start to head north. Coming back Sunday, you know the drill. It's the same thing. Why don't we give some alternatives to people? So we started meeting with cities along the Empire Builder route. Little Falls, St. Cloud, Staples, Wadena, Detroit Lakes, Fargo Moorhead. We talked to city managers. We talked to economic planning people. We went down to Red Wing and talked with the mayors, the tourism people to say, you know, folks, we're missing a bet here. By not having a reliable train, you could really boost your town's economy. People coming on and off those trains. And you know, they kind of went, yeah, might have something there. Yeah, maybe we should kind of get involved with that. And over time, we were able to get resolutions passed from all these cities that went to their state representatives going, we think we need increased passenger rail. Other studies came through, independent studies that were done years ago, asking people in the state as a whole, do you think it's a good idea to have improved passenger rail service? And you know what we found? 67%, 60 to 70% said, yeah, we think it's a good idea. So here again, you've got a situation where the majority of people want it, but the legislators won't do it. How frustrating is that? They just won't do it. There's an ideological divide. You've got people like this guy down at Lakeville who's never been on a train, wanted to kill Northstar entirely. Has he ever been on it? No. Doesn't know what he's talking about. I took my house rep years ago on the Northstar. I said, have you ever been on here? He says, no. Took him up to Big Lake and back. What'd you think? He said, it was great. I said, John, how many people that you work with at the legislature have ever actually ridden the Northstar? He looked at me and he went, none. So that's the kind of situation we as advocates face. The only way it's going to change is if the legislators hear from us. Everybody here, I would ask, just as a favor, but for your own benefit, sit down, write a letter to your House rep, write a letter to your Senate rep, and say, you know, a lot of studies have been done showing massive support for increased passenger rail in the state. How come we're not getting there? Put some pressure out there, because that's the only way anything's going to get done. That's what I learned. So, the actual process of getting a second train down to Chicago was painful and painfully slow, because it's not just here to Chicago. The train spends most of its time in Wisconsin. So you need coordination between Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Illinois, 3 states who are always changing at the state level. Every time there's an election, you'd have to almost start over again. But thankfully, Wisconsin took it upon themselves, their state DOT, to start really digging in and seeing if they could make something like this happen, because they could see that it was a good thing for their state too. And after a lot of back and forth coordination between MnDOT and Wisconsin and Illinois, they finally started to hammer out what an actual service would look like. And because starting a brand new train is a tall order for Amtrak, one of many, they had to figure out how to make it work. So they decided on the concept of extending one of their Hiawatha's, because Amtrak had a very successful Chicago-Milwaukee Hiawatha service, 8 and 9 round trips a day and doing very well. Why don't they extend one of those up to Minneapolis? So that became sort of the blueprint for how we got our second train to Borealis. You had to negotiate with the CP Railroad. You had to negotiate with the BNSF. You had to negotiate with Metra. All these moving parts. In this country, we don't have any really easy way to fund anything to do with rail transport. Everything subsidizes highways. Everything subsidizes airlines. And the way I see it, the only way that that's going to really change is if the major freight railroads somehow buy into the concept that they have to be part of the solution. Somehow. We've got to create some incentives for the freight railroads to open up their track to more passenger trains. And it's a tough sell because, as you know, they've ripped out main lines here to eternity, so there's only one single track. You know, you go out and watch these CP freight trains go away. My God, they're 185 cars long. 2 engines. You try and meet some of those out in the countryside, it takes half an hour for a freight train meet. So a 70-mile-an-hour zipper going through there creates all kinds of dispatching problems for them. Wah, wah, wah. That can be solved. Good grief. Maybe we need to get some federal money for added infrastructure, to add in some new sidings, to extend some double track, to maybe make one track a higher speed track, you know, that the freight can use if they have to get stuff around each other. These are all things that we as advocates have to be starting to talk about. And I know it's a hard road. So, between what we wanted, Minneapolis to Chicago, fewer stops, 7 hours, we ended up with St. Paul Union Depot, which is, you know, no doubt it's a grand station, but it doesn't serve Minneapolis. They're cutting their nose to spite their face. 12 stops across Wisconsin, including 3 and 42 miles between Wisconsin Dells, Portage, and Columbus, plus Sturtevant, I guess, and an 8+ hour running time, which doesn't connect with virtually any other Amtrak train in Chicago. That was one of the other things we said. It should connect with other Amtrak trains in Chicago so people could go elsewhere. So we only got half a loaf, but boy, I'll tell you what, the Borealis has been knocking it out of the park. Sold out almost every day, and now they only have 3 cars. So that's an Amtrak problem. So now we've got people trying to push Amtrak to give us some more capacity on this train. It's breaking records. But it has shown us, and it has shown Red Wing and Winona and La Crosse, that tourism and economic value does flow from these trains. Their tourism has jumped up by many, many, many percentages. They see people getting on and off the train, having a good time, making day trips that didn't exist before. And all of a sudden they're going, you know, they're organizing their business communities. You know, business people, business leaders have a big role to play too. And that's another, if you know any business leaders, people that have any influence at the legislature, please talk to them. Go to our website, allaboardmin.org. It's a great website with a lot of information about what traveling by train is all about. Steer them to that website. Get them going. Educate. Stir the water. Please. It's going to require all of us to do it. I would actually also put in a plug for All Aboard Minnesota. I would suggest everybody become a member. It's like $10, $15 a year. You know, they hold annual meetings. They're active at the legislature. They can take you up to date on what bills are being, you know, put together and heard in committee. A good way to stay in touch with, keep a finger on the pulse of what happens here at our state legislature. They'll be at train days. They have a nice booth up there every year. And it's an all-volunteer organization. Nobody gets paid a thing. So there's a shameless plug for All Aboard Minnesota, huh? As far as what's coming next, now that we got this second train, they're now pushing to extend the Empire Builder up to serve St. Cloud and Fargo-Moorhead. And I'll tell you, if there's an area in the state that wants a train during the day, like today, it's Fargo-Moorhead. They've had programs and presentations up there that have been sponsored by city leaders, and the people go, yeah, we would love a train from here to the Twin Cities and back during the day instead of in the middle of the night. Yeah, how can we do this? So again, resolutions were signed, sent to the legislature, but the legislature just sits on their hands. I think it's a tragedy myself. I think it's sad. But again, you've got the problem that very, very few people know what it's like to ride on a train. They don't know what they're missing. They don't understand it. They have some notion of maybe what their parents did years ago, you know, back in the day, or World War II or wherever it was, and it's just, all they know is driving and flying. And let's face it, flying is not exactly a very fun proposition these days. I mean, I think you would agree with me on that. Does anybody here like to fly anywhere? I didn't think so. I sure don't. I hate it. If I had an alternative to take a train, I'd do it if I could. I think most of you guys would probably agree. That and driving. Well, I've got the freedom of a car. What do you do when you get there? You don't have a car. Well, if you get to Chicago, Chicago Union Station has a network of feelers that go out everywhere into the whole surrounding countryside. It's easy to transfer to someplace to get almost anywhere you want in Chicago. And then if you got to rent a car, call up Enterprise. Not a big deal. Uber. Which is another thing that people miss. Trains get you downtown to downtown. At least if we can convince MnDOT and the powers that be that downtowns like Minneapolis deserve something in the way. Minneapolis is one of the largest cities in the country, has no Amtrak service anywhere, no passenger service anywhere, right? We have a very unique area here. I've learned this. Instead of having one core metro area, which is what most cities in the country have, one urban core, we have two separate and distinct, 12 miles from each other. That makes things tough here. But living in the west suburbs of Minneapolis, I can tell you that there are vast swaths of population in the Twin Cities that just don't want to go to St. Paul. They got to thread their way through that stupid Lowry Hill Tunnel, and that backs up a mile more often than you might think. Maple Grove, Golden Valley, Edina, St. Louis Park, Hopkins, Minnetonka, Wayzata, Eden Prairie, Chanhassen. They all know where the airport is, and they all know how to get to Target Center. But if I went down today, after I left here, and strolled the streets of downtown Hopkins and asked the first 100 people I came to, do you know how to get to St. Paul Union Depot? I bet not one out of 100 would. It's just not something that's in their heads. St. Paul Union Depot, wonderful structure. I got nothing against it. It's beautiful. But you know, it sits off the freeway grid. It's hard for people to find if you're from west of the river. It's a funny story. When I moved up here at 80, I was working at a headquarters office for a travel industry company, and there's about 1,000 people there at the home office. And as I got my bearings and figured out how to get around and found a place to live and all that stuff, you know, talking with people, some of them would come from St. Paul. Most of them lived around southwest suburbs or somewhere around Minneapolis. And I was amazed at the number of people that I talked to from the Minneapolis side. I've never been to St. Paul. I mean, you've never been to St. Paul. It's like 10 miles away. Why do we need to go to St. Paul? That's what they'd say. I'm going, really? Of course, I'd been a traveling salesman. You know, I'd travel 3 states, you know, and my job, you know, so driving for me was a piece of cake. To go 11 miles to downtown St. Paul was like, there's a problem here? But I found out, too, that the people in St. Paul felt the same way about Minneapolis. Why do we need to go to that nouveau riche city over there, you know? It's like, wow. And as I've lived here now all these years, I really come to realize that this thing between St. Paul and Minneapolis is a real barricade to getting anything positive going in the rail area. There's an enmity there. They just don't like each other. And that goes back generations from what I'm told. Again, I don't know what to say about it. It's sad to me. It just makes me want to scream. So, at this point, let me just stop. Is there any questions? Anybody have any questions? Oh, quiet group. Nothing here has rung any bells? Yes, sir.
How about the run to Duluth?
Oh, it's on life support, but it hasn't died. I'm planning to go up and talk to Ken Buehler up there at the museum. He's part of the NLX Alliance, and just say, you know, what can we do? They're proposing, of course, kind of a big ask. 4 trains each way a day, 90 miles an hour, you know, build all the new stations and everything, only into Minneapolis, no plans to go to St. Paul. Why, I don't know. And that has been a tough ask because it requires the BNSF to upgrade their main line there to 90 miles an hour, and that's going to be a lot of money. They got to CTC the whole thing, maybe add or extend a couple sidings. And nobody even knows yet how much they'd charge, so we don't know how much the eventual total is going to cost. I've been asked, well, why don't they cut down their ask maybe to 2 round trips a day at 79 miles an hour and see if we can get that through? I want to meet with Ken. I want to ask him about that. I want to see what he says. I mean, I don't know what their position is on it, but we'd like to see it. We'd like to see it. And ideally, you should be able to funnel these to Fargo, Moorhead, St. Cloud, Duluth, down into the Twin Cities, and then on to Milwaukee and Chicago. A connecting. You need a system. Trains work best when there's a system, a network. So it isn't just point A to point B, and that's the people, the airline people at Amtrak don't seem to get that. It's C, D, E, F, G, A, all along the way, which creates city pairs that people can get on and off for different reasons. It's another thing that most people don't understand about train travel. It isn't just point A to point B. If you're a college student in Winona and you live in Fargo, Moorhead, you're out of luck. Business people, rather than for 7 hours, oh, look out for that truck, oh, you could open up your laptop, get some business done, read a magazine, do something, use your time productively. These are assets that we need to talk about to people. So I guess if I left you with anything at this point, I would just say, if you can, please do something to help out and to make it happen. That means setting up a relationship with your House rep and your House senator as a first step. I see a hand up there. I believe it's Mr. Torseth.
If you could get something like, say, ALS or whatever extended to Minneapolis, with so much stuff that's been ripped up, where would you come into Minneapolis?
The existing route that's in place would leave St. Paul Union Depot, go up Short Line Hill, just like Builder does, cut through the commercial. You'd get on BNSF's brand new double track main line down to Minneapolis Junction, where you'd take the east leg of the Y across the river right into Target Station. But is BNSF going to allow that? Not without pressure. They're going to need a lot of pressure to say that. Dealing with these railroads is hard. It's hard. And again, they ain't going to listen unless the state wants to do something. So the governor appoints most of the people. The governor needs to appoint people and make that part of his budget too. There's another contact you could make, the governor. Of course, at this point, I don't know if that makes any difference because he's on the way out, but whoever the next governor is. And I think Amy, if she gets it, has always been supportive of Amtrak at the national level, federal level. So I hope that they would have an open ear for advocates like us. I hope so.
Do you have anything to do with light rail?
No. It's funny you asked that, actually. All Aboard Minnesota decided earlier on that they wouldn't become involved with stuff like commuter rail or for light rail. Their key focus is longer distance intercity, i.e. Amtrak or whoever. Yeah. And that's been their focus. For better or for worse. I mean, that's what they decided. Yeah.
Any chance of repurposing that Northstar equipment for any of this additional service?
Doesn't look like it. They're getting rid of it. Although I think MnDOT has evidenced some interest in retaining that maintenance facility up in Big Lake for possible extension service up to St. Cloud and back. So that's maybe. They just came out, by the way, MnDOT just came out with their new updated state rail plan. It's on their website. I haven't read it yet. It's big, it's long. But I think that could give us some clues as to where we might be headed in the future, and I really got to get my arms around what their plan is. I'm not sure the people who are in their rail planning office know a heck of a lot about trains, but at least they know something. So it's better than nothing. You know? I mean, let's face it, MnDOT, how many, 8,000 employees? 3 working on rail, you know. They're a highway department, like most states are. Yeah, that's where all the money goes. People, you know, legislators, well, we can't do a subsidy. You subsidize all transportation. You know, how many trillions have gone into highways? You know, they subsidize Thief River Falls Airport. The per passenger subsidy for somebody flying out of there is like $600. And they complain about the Northstar? See, you know, it's perspective. Perspectives.
I think that Northstar, the rolling stock already been spoken for.
Yeah, some of them went to Dallas. Some of them went to Dallas. Yeah.
At least 8 cars to Texas.
Yeah, right.
So they still got,
That's just a lease.
yeah, it's just a lease. But, you know, with Amtrak so short on equipment, how is any new service possible?
Right, but they're not designed as long distance cars. They're commuter cars, you know. Maybe St. Cloud, you know, but I can't see much of a use for it in anything inner city. I mean, they're in a situation where the superliners are, you know, 30, 40, 50 years old, and they got to start replacing them, and, you know, it's always go to Congress with your hat in your hand and hope that the budget people give you some money, and if not, you know, that's the thing with Amtrak, they don't have a dedicated funding source. That's been their major problem. They can't plan anything, and it's sad, you know. So we're left with what's left. I don't know that I'm going to be able to fill up a full 2 hours here, because really that's the gist of what I had to say. I hope I got you guys a little bit interested in All Aboard Minnesota. If you go over to Train Day, stop in and talk to the guys. They'd love to talk to you. I mean, anybody that's of the rail train persuasion is people they want to talk to. But they do get a lot of people that don't have any experience, just people with their families go, what's this all about? And they all look at the map, they go, oh yeah, I used to live up there, I'd take the train. You know, so we continually trying to drive more support for the whole concept. So.
Are you working on that Kansas City one?
Yes. The route to Fargo-Moorhead and the route to Kansas City is their current focus. Yeah. Again, tough ask, you know, asking UP to put a train on the spine line down to Kansas City, whew, that's going to be like pulling teeth, you know.
Any idea how long it would take? I need the actual time to run that train.
Probably 9 hours. Yeah. Yeah. The track is pretty good. It would need to be upgraded in some places. Signaling, I'm not sure. You get down south of Des Moines, it starts to get hilly and curvy, and so you probably can't make 79. And then getting into Kansas City, of course, you got all that slow running and all the trackage and whatnot. But it would give us a way to connect with the Western trains without going east to Chicago and overnighting. Yeah. So, I mean, you have to approach challenges like that with the thought process that goes, this isn't going to happen overnight, but we got to start somewhere, you know, and push it best we can. Well, that's all I had for you today, guys. Unless there's anything, I'd be glad to stick around. Business cards are out here. Feel free to go out. I'd be always happy to talk with you anytime you're interested.